Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Back with another speculation video talking about Hisuian forms. Of course, in the last video, we talked about Samurai. So I figured we will do another starter and go for Decidueye. And as always, we don't really have an idea of what the format's going to be, and it is not 100% confirmed that all of these Hisuian forms will make it into the game. So this is mostly just speculation. But it is fun to do, so let's get into it. So Hisuian Decidueye is grass fighting, and I do not like this typing, just right out of the gate. It has a 4x to flying, and that is just bad. That's a bad 4x to have in VGC, and pretty much any VGC from Gen 5 onward. But it also is weak to poison, fire, psychic, ice, and fairy. Fairy is reasonably common, and so is fire. As for the others, ice is usually coverage. You don't see poison that often, so that's not a big deal. Psychic, depends on the meta. It also resists 6 typings, which is not bad. But if we look at normal Decidueye, it only has 5 things that it is weak to. And it only resists 4 things, but it has 2 immunities, that being normal and fighting. Those immunities make the grass ghost typing much more defensive than the Hisuian's grass fighting. Going over to offense, the Hisuian form does have a little bit more coverage here. So it has 7 super effectives, which is honestly pretty good. Like normal, ground, rock, steel, water, ice, dark. But it does have 3 things that resist its typings, that being flying, poison, and bug. So that is something to keep in mind. Whereas the original does not have anything that it cannot hit for normal damage, aside from like some special dual typing. But it only has 5 super effectives. So overall, it's not really a typing you want to have in VGC. I think the only mon that gets away with it is Breloom, and that's because Breloom has really good stuff going for it. So if this thing does too, maybe it could be quite useful, but we'll have to wait and see. Abilities are the same, and I think Long Reach is actually a pretty good option. It's better for the Hisuian form than it is the original form, and I'll get into that in a little bit. If we look at the stats, the Hisuian form is slower. I believe it is 10 less base speed. It also has lower special defense by 5, but it has 5 more physical defense, 5 less special attack, 10 more hit points, and 5 more physical attack. So it's kind of swapping stats around. It's swapping stats around a lot, and I like that it has more attack stat. It's really gonna need that. It's a little bit more optimized than the original Decidueye. It is more physically bulky, but I think it kind of trades off on the special. Possibly. Yeah, I think it does. Because it has 10 more hit points, but 5 less special defense. I think that trades off. And of course it is slower. That may or may not be an issue. Really just depends on the scenarios it might get stuck in. Anyway, now to take a look at that signature move, which is triple arrows. It's a fighting type move. That is 50 base power, 100 accurate, and I believe its power points 15. I didn't actually look at the power points on Samurai, but I believe it's also 15 on its signature moves. So anyway, it's like this weird multi-attack move that looks like it would be a bunch of hits. It's just 1 hit. But the important thing to look at is it increases your crit rate and lowers the target's defensive stats, which when carried over into VGC, it is probably going to be 1 stage up of critical hit rate and lower 1 stage of the opponent's defense stat. Which, if you're wondering, what is this gonna counter? Okay, we have a fighting type move that increases crit chance and lowers defense. Combined with the ability long reach so you don't actually make contact, this sounds like a hard counter to Ferrothorn, which literally just messes up the almost any iron defense build is kind of messed up by this, because most of them are still types. So this could be a really good answer to just get rid of all of those annoying iron defense builds that you don't want to deal with. Which, judging by this move and some of the other moves it gets, I already have a build in mind. And it's going to sound kind of familiar if you watched the last video. I think this could really use a Razor Claw and be run as a crit build, because you get a move that raises your crit chance, lowers the target's defense, and is an attack. That move does like 3 things in one, which would be very helpful to set up a crit build. Because if you're running a Razor Claw, you only need 1 stage up of crit chance to have 100% crit rate on Leaf Blade, which it also gets, which would do massive damage to anything that is weak to grass. Even things that aren't weak to grass, it's still gonna hurt them pretty bad. So that is a great option here. Triple arrows and Leaf Blade are just a really good combo, I think. Now, the Hisuian form also gets Psycho Cut and Shadow Claw, which could be some interesting coverage for your crit build. Psycho Cut would cover poison because it can't actually hit poison. Now, taking a look at some of the moves the original gets, you do have access to things like Sucker Punch, U-Turn, Shadow Sneak. Not sure if the Hisuian will get Shadow Sneak. It's probably not getting that. If you're playing in a slow meta and there's not a flying type staring you down, Roost would be a good option. This thing does not have coverage for flying, and the original form has 1 rock move, and that is Smackdown, which is not an ideal coverage move. So you're really going to struggle against flying types. You'll have to rely on maybe Psycho Cut just to hit it for neutrally effective damage. But aside from the crit build and its limited coverage, and how this thing's probably just gonna get destroyed by Togekiss, I don't really see much else it can do. Perhaps you could do something with Bulk Up, but I think just having triple arrows would be more effective, as triple arrows basically replaces all of your other setup moves that you would normally run on this, like Focus Energy, Bulk Up, Swords Dance if it were to get that, because it's really nice to have an attack that also sets up, because you get a potential Sash Break, you can cover Switch In, things like that. Yeah, it really doesn't have another build I think you can do on it. Even the original, you only get like a few more moves that are actually useful for this thing, and the rest of it's just really would not run it except for very specific metas. Like if you're trying to counter something very particular. So what is this thing good for? As I've already said, it's very strong against iron defense builds, particularly Ferrothorn, which it just ignores Ferrothorn's entire game, because Ferrothorn cannot set up Leech Seed on it, iron defense is kind of useless against it, and Long Reach ignores Iron Barbs. So you just have no way of doing anything with Ferrothorn when the Hisuian Decidueye is staring you down. It's kind of sad. But that is what this thing seems to be geared towards. It's just a hard counter. And other body press builds, maybe like Registeel. Registeel doesn't lose defense, but it will still get crit through. So it's still not a good matchup. And any other bulky stall builds that set up with defensive stats, this will be pretty strong against. But what is it weak to? Well, it's weak to all the strong flying types in the meta. So the legendary bird trio and stuff like Thundurus, Tornadus, you know, those. If you've been in VGC long enough, you have seen those around, and this thing's bad into almost all of them. You just can't do anything, and that's gonna make this thing pretty hard to run. You need a lot of coverage in your team, and you can't rely on this thing like a core strat. It has to be kind of a team preview sort of thing for very specific matchups. That you can't just bring this thing in all the time. It's just not consistent when it has to fight a bunch of flying types, and stuff like Togekiss, even this thing struggles against very hard. So I actually think this is worse than Hisuian Samurai. Hisuian Samurai, I think you could find ways to make it work where it's actually going to be quite useful to have, especially if there's a very strong ghost type or psychic type in the meta. This thing is only going to be useful if there's a strong body press build in the meta, which the Ferrothorn is usually pretty common, but there's other ways around Ferrothorn, like a fire move. Get your flamethrower coverage and you're good to go. So overall, not really impressed with this new mon. It should be okay in like a best of 1. I definitely would not bring this in a best of 3. It's just not going to be useful. So anyway, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.